Imagine you take a photograph and cut it in half. What happens? You lose half the image, of course. But get this, take a hologram and do the same. You still see the entire picture, just a little blurrier. The whole is encoded in every part. Now ask yourself this: what if your brain works the same way? What if your memories, your thoughts, even your sense of self aren't locked away in little compartments inside your head, but spread out, patterned across a wave-like field, just like a hologram? In this episode, we're going to dive into one of the most intriguing and overlooked ideas in neuroscience, Karl Pribram's holographic brain theory, a model that challenges the very way we think about thought. Karl Pribram wasn't your average neuroscientist. Trained as both a neurosurgeon and a brain researcher, he spent decades working at top institutions like Yale and Stanford. He ended up grappling with the most fundamental question in neuroscience: where is memory stored? His early work focused on the brain's limbic system and how different regions contributed to behavior and perception. But what really set him apart was his willingness to step outside the bounds of traditional thinking. Influenced by cybernetics, information theory, and even quantum physics, Pribram began to suspect that the brain's architecture did not work like a machine. It worked more like a hologram. And he wasn't alone. Around the same time, physicist David Bohm was developing a holographic model of the universe. The two men would eventually meet, and their conversations would shape a radical idea that the brain might not just store memories, it might be decoding patterns that emerge from its interaction with reality itself. In the mid-20th century, neuroscience was advancing rapidly. Researchers believed that if they could just map the brain precisely enough, identify where each function was located, they could explain how memory worked. But something didn't add up. Experiments with animals, especially rats, revealed a strange pattern. Scientists could remove large sections of a rat's brain, yet the animal would still remember how to run a maze it had learned before. The more tissue they removed, the fuzzier the memory got perhaps, but the memory itself did not disappear. It was as if memory was not stored in a particular place, but spread out across the brain. Human cases told a similar story. People with brain injuries often retain vivid memories, even after major trauma. Others lost particular memories in ways that didn't neatly match the area of damage. This puzzled researchers. How could a localized organ, like the brain, store information in such a distributed way? For Pribram, this was key. Memory didn't behave like files in a cabinet or data on a hard drive. It acted more like a wave pattern, something that could be distorted but not destroyed, blurred but still present, just like a hologram. The concept of a hologram wasn't just a clever metaphor. It offered a new way to think about how the brain might store and retrieve information. A hologram isn't a picture. It's a recording of interference patterns created when laser light reflects off an object and mixes with a reference beam. Those patterns don't look like the image itself, they look like swirls and noise. But when the right kind of light shines through, the full 3D image appears, as if by magic. What's most remarkable is this: if you break a hologram into smaller pieces, each piece still contains the entire image, just with less detail. The whole is embedded in every part. This was the spark Pribram needed. What if the brain doesn't store information in localized memory centers, but rather in wave interference patterns, much like a hologram? What if memory is encoded across the brain's structure in a non-local, distributed way? To explore this idea, he drew from the mathematics of Fourier transforms, a method used to convert spatial information into frequency patterns, and the same math that is used to decode, that's right, holograms. In fact, studies of the visual cortex show that neurons respond to spatial frequencies, suggesting the brain may naturally process information in a wave-based, Fourier-like manner. Pribram believed that the brain might be doing the same thing, transforming sensory experiences into wave-based codes, storing them across the brain in interference-like patterns, and then reconstructing them when needed. This meant that memory, and perhaps even perception itself, wasn't about static storage, but dynamic decoding. The brain, he suggested, was less a warehouse of images and more a lens, focusing and reconstructing patterns like a hologram. Now let's take a look at the key features of the holographic brain theory. If the brain really works like a hologram, what does that mean for how we understand memory, perception, and consciousness? Pribram laid out several key features that define this model, and each one flips the conventional view on its head. First, there's distributed storage. In a holographic system, information isn't stored in one location. It's smeared out across the entire structure. That's why damaging part of the brain doesn't always destroy a memory completely. It just reduces the resolution, like slicing a hologram in half. The image is still there, just fuzzier. Secondly, this model emphasizes pattern recognition over location-based retrieval. The brain doesn't pull a memory from a particular file. Instead, it reconstructs a memory by decoding complex interference patterns that exist throughout the neural network. Thirdly, Pribram believed the brain operated through wave interference, not just electrical pulses between neurons. He proposed that neurons were sensitive not just to firing patterns, but to spatial and temporal frequencies, a kind of brain-based resonance that could allow experiences to be encoded in overlapping frequency domains. And finally, the model offered an elegant explanation for the brain's incredible plasticity and resilience. If information is stored as patterns across networks, then even when one part of the network is damaged, the whole can still adapt and recover. This aligns with what we see in stroke patients, memory retention after injury, and even how people regain function using different brain regions. To Pribram, the holographic model wasn't just a new theory. It was a potential solution to mysteries that had stumped neuroscience for decades. Pribram's holographic brain theory did not emerge in isolation. As mentioned earlier, physicist David Bohm was developing his own radical vision, the holographic universe. Bohm proposed that the very fabric of reality might be structured like a hologram, where every part contains information about the whole. When he and Pribram met, the overlap between their ideas was striking. Both sensed they were glimpsing a deeper layer of reality, one that suggested perception, memory, and even existence itself might arise from patterns more fundamental than particles or circuits. This concept also resonates with theories outside mainstream neuroscience. Biologist Rupert Sheldrake, for instance, introduced the idea of morphic fields, non-material organizing patterns that guide biological development and behavior. Sheldrake's work shares a key intuition with Pribram, that memory and form might not be generated solely within the system, but accessed from fields that extend beyond it. Today, AI research is exploring similar ideas, such as holonomic computing and liquid neural networks, where information isn't stored in fixed nodes, but in the dynamic relationship between them. These systems rely on distributed, time-sensitive processes rather than static logic, echoing Pribram's vision of the brain as a fluid, resonance-based decoder rather than a linear processor. Pribram's ideas have also influenced pattern recognition technologies, neural field theories, and quantum cognition models, which explore the possibility that consciousness may arise from wave-like interference and entanglement rather than purely local neuron-to-neuron signaling. Even in connectome mapping, the effort to chart the brain's entire network, we see hints of this distributed, non-local logic coming into focus. Across physics, biology, philosophy, and technology, one metaphor keeps resurfacing, that the whole is somehow present in every part. and that the systems we're trying to understand, whether brains, networks, or the universe itself, may be fundamentally wave-based, interconnected, and more fluid than fixed. Sure, the holographic brain theory is bold, but let's now ask, is there any evidence to support it? Well, the answer is partially. There's strong support for one of its core claims. Neuroscience has confirmed that memories don't live in neatly defined compartments. Instead, they emerge from networks of activity that span multiple regions. This is especially evident in cases where brain damage impairs function without completely erasing memory, and in how the brain can rewire itself to compensate for injury, phenomena that fit well with Pribram's model. We also know that the brain processes waves of electrical activity, not just isolated neuron firings. Brain rhythms like alpha, beta, and gamma waves play a major role in perception, attention, and consciousness. Some researchers believe that interference patterns between these waves may be central to how the brain binds experiences together into a coherent whole. But the more radical aspects of Pribram's theory, such as the brain performing Fourier-like transformations or decoding a field of non-local information, are much harder to prove. They're difficult to measure directly, and current neuroscience lacks the tools to definitively confirm or refute them. That said, the theory continues to inspire research in artificial intelligence, cognitive science, and even psychedelic studies, where the boundaries of perception and consciousness are often described in field-like or holographic terms. So while Pribram's model may not be mainstream, it remains scientifically plausible, philosophically rich, and open-ended enough to evolve with new discoveries. So what would it mean if Karl Pribram was right, even partially? What if memory isn't stored in little boxes inside the brain, but is encoded in patterns, like ripples across a pond or interference waves in a field of light? What if the brain isn't so much a container of thoughts, but a decoder, a receiver that tunes into information already distributed throughout the system? Ultimately, this perspective doesn't change how we think about memory. It challenges the way we view ourselves. If our experiences are stored not in one place, but woven throughout a wave field, could the same be true for consciousness? Could your sense of self, the you behind your eyes, be less like a file in a folder and more like a resonant wave pattern woven throughout a field of experience, constantly reconstructed by your brain? We may not know for sure, but one thing is certain. The brain is far more than a biological machine. It's a pattern-seeking, shape-reconstructing, meaning-generating system, possibly more like a lens than a library, more interference pattern than code. And perhaps that's what Pribram saw all along. Not just a brain full of neurons, but a universe full of hidden structure, just waiting to be read. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for exploring this theory with me. Whether you're drawn to the science, the mystery, or the possibilities it opens, Pribram's work reminds us that even the most familiar things, like our own minds, may be operating on principles we've only just begun to understand. I certainly can't wait to hear what you think about all of this. Is your brain more like a hologram or a hard drive? Please be sure to make the YouTube algorithm happy so we can share this information with more curious minds. Until next time, take care.